Good evening. London is being failed by an institutionally racist, sexist and homophobic police force. Black people are both over-policed and under-protected. Keeping women and girls safe is not a priority, and the capital no longer has a functioning neighbourhood policing service. Those are just some of the damning findings from Baroness Louise Casey's 360-page report into standards and culture at the Metropolitan Police. The review was ordered by the Mayor after Sarah Everard was abducted, raped and murdered by a serving police officer 2 years ago. Today, Sadiq Khan said he's sad and angry at the findings, but he's not shocked. Our political correspondent Simon Harris now on the full details of that report and its repercussions.
When Sarah Everard disappeared in South London 2 years ago, no one could predict the chain of events which led to today's report. But her murder at the hands of Wayne Couzens, a serving police officer, exposed a disturbing and toxic culture.
We have to know that when a man shows us a warrant card and asks us to do something, that we can trust him. And that we have to be able to be sure that they are people of good conduct, and at the moment we can't prove it.
Baroness Casey's report charges the Met with failing to protect the public from officers who abuse women, allowing alleged rapists to go free after fridges broke down, destroying vital evidence, and a damning finding of institutional racism, misogyny and homophobia. It's 24 years since the inquiry into the murder of Stephen Lawrence came to a similar conclusion, that the Met was institutionally racist.
The investigation was marred by a combination of professional incompetence, by institutional racism.
But today's conclusion by Baroness Casey has opened a rift between those in charge of the Met.
I understand her use of the term institutional. It's not a term I use myself. I'm a practical police officer. I have to use language that's unambiguous and is apolitical, and that term means lots of different things to different people and has become politicised in recent debate over the last decade.
Sir Mark Rowley says he doesn't accept the use of the words institutional when it comes to racism, misogyny and homophobia. Do you think he's wrong?
But my message to Londoners is I think that our police service, and it pains me to say this, is institutionally racist, is institutionally homophobic, is institutionally misogynist.
So Sir Mark's wrong?
Well, the evidence of Dame Louise Casey is quite clear. I spoke to Sir Mark yesterday at length. He accepts fully the report from Dame Louise Casey. He accepts the sexism, misogyny and homophobia. He's got his own reasons for not being comfortable with the term institutional.
Inside the Met, institutional racism means black, Asian and minority ethnic officers are sometimes bullied.
I did 30 years in policing and I didn't want to leave. I wanted to stay and continue to be a police officer. I was bullied out because I started to raise issues that I thought were unacceptable. And what happens is that the other people will use the complaints procedure against you to bully you, to intimidate you.
Outside the Met, as many Londoners are all too aware, institutional racism also finds its way onto the streets. In particular, Baroness Casey thinks black Londoners are over-policed. They're more likely to be stopped, searched, handcuffed, restrained with batons and tasered. And she concludes that policing on a local level has been fractured to the point where London no longer has a functioning neighbourhood police service. Her recommendations include a new borough-based approach to policing, new specialist teams to deal with rape and sexual offences, regular vetting of police officers throughout their career. There's a call for the armed unit, which protects politicians and royalty, to be disbanded. It's where Wayne Couzens and the serial rapist David Carrick both served.
Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper.
In the Commons, the findings of the report led to a clash between government and opposition.
Where is the plan to restore neighbourhood policing? Labour has set out a plan. We would work with the government on this, but where is the government's plan?
I would point out to the Shadow Home Secretary that her crass political attacks really would be more accurately directed at the person with actual and political responsibility for overseeing the performance of the Met. That is the Mayor of London, Labour's Sadiq Khan.
Tonight, the Met is on notice. If it doesn't change, it might be broken up. Simon Harris, ITV News, Scotland Yard.
Well, back to our political correspondent, Simon Harris, who's outside Scotland Yard now. Simon, where does the force go from here, do you think?
Well, early on in her report, Baroness Casey makes the point that the Met doesn't easily accept criticism or learn from its mistakes. So I think Sir Mark, the Commissioner, and his deputy are going to be under a huge amount of pressure to prove that is no longer the case. When I spoke to the Mayor, I asked him how long he was giving Sir Mark to turn things around, and he suggested a reasonable timetable was 2 years. I also asked him if he thought Sir Mark was the right man for the job, and he said yes, something Baroness Casey appears to agree with. The question of how long it takes for the Met to regain the lost trust of Londoners is something no one can answer at the moment, but we may learn a bit more from Sir Mark about his next steps when he's questioned by the London Assembly tomorrow.
Simon, many thanks.
Good evening. Hand on heart, I did not lie to the House. Boris Johnson's words today as he faced MPs investigating his response to Partygate. In a 4-hour grilling before the Privileges Committee, the former Prime Minister denied he had knowingly misled Parliament over the lockdown parties which took place at the very heart of Westminster. That committee will decide whether they believe his version of events or not. For the capital, the outcome could have significant consequences, especially if he loses his seat as an MP. In a moment, we hear from people in Boris Johnson's Uxbridge and South Ruislip constituency. But first, our political correspondent Simon Harris has been listening to the evidence he gave today.
Boris Johnson hasn't run out of road yet, but as he headed for his Partygate showdown in Parliament, he knew what was at stake. The Privileges Committee has the power to deliver a potentially fatal blow to his political career. As he began his evidence, the former Prime Minister confronted the issue at the heart of the inquiry.
I am here to say to you, hand on heart, that I did not lie to the House.
He said despite appearances, pictures of social gatherings in Number 10 during lockdown were not of rule-breaking parties when no one was social distancing.
They show nothing of the kind. They show me giving a few words of thanks at a work event for a departing colleague. They show me, with my red box, passing on the way to another meeting, or heading back into my flat to carry on working often late into the night.
But when he was cross-examined by MPs, he was challenged about this leaving do for a member of staff.
The photographs we've just seen do not seem to show any actual work being done. Why did it not occur to you that it at least might have been in breach of the regulations?
So did it occur to me that it might not be reasonably necessary for work purposes?
Yes.
No, it didn't occur to me for 1 second that it wasn't reasonably necessary for work purposes.
He was also questioned about the gathering on his birthday, attended by his wife and their interior designer. It led to him being fined.
Why did you think this was reasonably necessary for work purposes, as required by the rules at the time?
I thought it was reasonably necessary for work purposes because I was standing at my desk surrounded by officials who'd been asked to come and wish me a happy birthday. I'd only recently recovered from an illness, from COVID.
The investigation by MPs is to whether Mr Johnson knowingly misled Parliament with statements like this.
All guidance was followed completely during Number 10.
I have been repeatedly assured since these allegations emerged that there was no party. When I said those words, I was not trying to cover up or conceal anything. I said what I said in good faith, based on what I honestly knew and reasonably believed at the time.
The hearing took place in the Thatcher Room on the first floor of Portcullis House opposite Big Ben. If it all goes wrong for Boris Johnson, his career as a London MP could be on a knife edge. An MP found to have deliberately misled Parliament can be suspended. If that suspension is for more than 10 days, it would trigger what's known as a recall petition, and that can lead to a by-election.
So I know some people think they can put a stake in his heart, so to speak, and that he'll vanish and never be seen again. But I don't think it's that easy. He has a rapport with the voters.
I hope that at the end of the day, the punishment fits the crime. And that really should be him being suspended from being an MP. And this may involve a by-election, which we could not hope for more.
The fact that he is trying to wriggle out of taking responsibility for, an egregious breach of his own rules that he imposed on everybody else, I don't think there's any way back for him.
After more than 3 hours, Boris Johnson told the committee there was not a shred of evidence against him. Simon Harris, ITV News, Westminster.
Well, Simon joins us now. And Simon, you watched it all today, lots to digest. But what did you make of Boris Johnson's performance?
Well, this was a very different Boris Johnson to the one we're used to. There were very few attempts at the usual trademark humour. He did talk about social distancing and saying it was impossible in Downing Street to have a 2-metre electronic force field around the staff or a drill sergeant with a stick to measure distances. But by and large, this was a sober and serious performance. He clearly knows what's at stake and he's clearly been briefed by his lawyers. For most of the 3 hours, apart from the odd interruption when he and the other MPs had to go off to vote, he argued his case that he didn't deliberately mislead Parliament, that when he knew the full facts about the parties in Downing Street, he updated Parliament and he apologised. He tried to distance himself from his supporters who suggested the inquiry is a kangaroo court, and he ended by asking the MPs to exonerate him.
All right, Simon, we'll be watching closely what happens next. Thank you.